I have the pleasure right now of introducing Dr. Dave Draper. Dave is the Deputy Chief Scientist for NASA. He has a doctorate from the University of Oregon. I will note that we have we're very lucky, our community, to have a bona fide lunar scientist at his level in the agency. We've worked together for years, and getting that kind of representation is fantastic. He previously served as head of astromaterials at Johnson Space Center. And today he's going to address an issue that we spoke of at the Survey Executive Committee a month or so ago that I think that we all need to pay attention to for the future health of our field on predatory publishing. And I want to say at the outset that Survey plans to take a leading role in helping Dave find solutions to this problem. So Dave, please take it away.
Thank you, sir. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So first, thank you again, Greg, for that fine introduction, and thank you all for also for the invitation to come talk about this really important issue today. And that is one that I think many of us are familiar with, and we've probably all gotten emails like the ones I've got on the screen here. If you're like me, you get a couple of them a week. Some of them are just so obviously bogus. Take this one in the upper left here. Not only is it kind of crazy sounding, but I mean, they got these funky characters instead in the font. I mean, the P's and the B's look weird. It just looks like classic spam. In the upper right, it's a little more legit looking, but still obviously not really legit, because they're saying, hey, you send me something, I'm going to publish it. Just please pay me $2,000. Now, the one on the bottom looks a little more real. I mean, it name checks a bunch of, actual sciences here, biology and medical science and so forth. Problem is, this email was received by a planetary scientist who has zero background in this area. Next, please. Now, I think many of us, when we get these things, we might roll our eyes, throw it in the recycle bin, and have done with it. But I'm here to tell you that this problem is way worse than we think, and it is something that we as a community must get our hands on, and not just the planetary science community or this NASA family of sciences, but all of science as a frankly, a global enterprise. Now, I know many people have been thinking about this for a while, and you're probably familiar with a couple of lists that have been kept over the years of journals that engage in some of these practices. But there are many problems with lists, not the least of which is that they are obsolete as soon as you pick your pen up off the paper. Now, a couple of years ago, a group of scientists got together and hammered out a consensus definition and listed some features of predatory journals. And it's our position at the Office of the Chief Scientist that we all adopt this approach rather than try to keep a list. And I'm just going to read this out here. These are the features. Predatory journals and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship, characterized by false or misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, lack of transparency, or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. Next, please. This is a handy thing we can always just keep in our back pocket, and we don't need to worry about, is it on a list? We can just apply that definition, ask ourselves, what do we think about this particular journal? In the next couple of slides, I'm going to share a few charts from a presentation that I saw a couple of months ago now, put on by the Government University Industry Research Roundtable, GWIR, by a group known as the Inter-Academy Partnership, nonprofit group. And they are in the middle of a study right now, and they were reporting out on what they had learned thus far. At the time of their presentation, they'd had over 1,800 responses worldwide to their survey. It was designed to try to get people to be forthcoming. Next, please. And there's some very disturbing things that came out of this. First of all, at least 25% of the respondents admitted to either having published in one of these journals or somehow participated in this stuff. And this is the big thing. This is no longer a case of maybe a gullible scientist, becoming fooled, being taken in by some ruse. Unfortunately, we have moved into a phase where scientists are knowingly going to these predatory journals. And here are some quotations that came from some of this stuff. You got to publish to stay in the race, publish or perish. Oh, I feel guilty to send my students' paper to this, but they got to get it out. I need stuff for my CV. Boy, the lead author on my paper is friends with someone who's an editor of one of these journals. It must be okay. This is a dangerous and slippery slope that we're already sliding down in a big way. Next, please. A number of conclusions here. This is really permeating all of our global communities. It's becoming difficult to distinguish between, unethical practices. These guys are really good at making it look fuzzy. As is always the case, the bad guys are always a couple steps in front of the good guys. The thing I've got boxed here is the main thing we can do, and why I'm here today, is to raise awareness of this problem and get everybody to understand just how bad the situation is so that we can guard against it. Next, please. A couple of the root causes here. I mentioned one before, publish or perish. This is a metric that is used in academia and also in non-academic science circles. Another issue is one we've all known about for a while, and that is that the business of science publication is a business. It is for profit. And of course, these predatory journals, that's all they want. They just want our money. They don't care about anything else. So this is why we got to get this problem fixed. I mean, unfortunately, these predators are going to go off and prey on some other group to try to get their money. I'm sorry for those people, but we got to get our own situation in hand right now, today. Next, please. But wait, there's more. It's not just the predatory journals. This is something that just came out a couple of weeks ago in Science. This is another study now on science practices sort of writ large. And this is another study that was designed very overtly to maximize anonymity, again, to try to encourage candor in the responses. And what they found from this study of Dutch scientists is that half of them, more than half, admitted to regularly engaging in questionable research practices, hiding flaws in their research design, selectively citing literature and data. 1 in 12, 8%, admitted to outright fraud, making up data, falsifying results. It doesn't get any worse than that, folks, in our business, does it? Next, please. So this is our red alert. These emails aren't funny anymore. And this is the clarion call I'm trying to issue to everybody. We got to stop this. If this sort of thing metastasizes, we're going to see an explosion of the publication of spurious results, outright pseudoscience, and someone's going to try to confer validity on these results. Behold, we got it published. This is a thing we dare not let happen. Now, if I had put this slide up a couple of years ago, especially with this big, bold bottom line point here, I'd be getting a lot of eye rolls. I don't think that's the case anymore, because we have seen the consequences when as we've seen, credible science is not just disregarded, it's outright ridiculed and mocked. Policy that governments set must be based on rigor and integrity when it comes to scientific information and everything else for that matter. And because these people are in it to make money, right? Where's that money coming from? It is coming from our grants largely. Where are those grants coming from? They're coming from the governments that are trying to get science done. We don't want our government funding dollars to go into the hands of these predators. We are living in a time when, for years now, the very notion of expertise, the very idea that there are experts in something like us in what we do, is under assault. It's under sustained assault. And this is something that, if it is left unchecked, we are going to see the kind of things we've been living with for the past year and a half. The credibility of all science is under threat here, not just our own community. If this undertakes irreparable damage of the type that could very easily occur, we're going to see more and larger problems of the type we've been living with, potentially deadly consequences. I want to draw the analogy to two things we're living through right now: the pandemic and the climate emergency. The numbers I've been telling you about today are like the case counts in the pandemic. They are the tip of the iceberg. We know that this is the bare minimum badness of how this is. It's only going to be worse than what the numbers show. The second thing is about climate change. We've been thinking about and modeling the onset of changes to our climate for quite some time. And we've been thinking about it as we got to make some moves so our future isn't so bad. But guess what? We all know now it's here today. Same thing here, folks. This is a giant problem. It's happening now. Next, please. And so here's what we're doing at NASA. At the Office of the Chief Scientist, we're of course going to work with our agency leadership, our center chief scientists and research integrity officers. We're going to make sure they're all aware and getting this information into their organizations. I myself, plus my colleague, Dr. O.J. Tucker from the Goddard Space Flight Center, are serving on the Science Integrity Fast Track Action Committee that was stood up by presidential memo on the 27th of January. We're approaching scientific societies. We're coming to major conferences like today to raise awareness. We're going to make sure our citizen science teams and projects are up to speed on this. We're going to be adding an element to our training that we do for NASA scientists on the responsible conduct of research, working with other agencies through our connections on OSTP and others, and working with the science publishers themselves. So we got to re-examine this model of how science publishing happens. We got to get the money out of the equation, because that's what these predators are after. And so in our office, we've actually been talking to the Nature group of publishers for about a year on this. Next, please. And my last slide, this is my call to action. We urge you, use that Nature definition of predatory journals and conferences. Watch the webinar from which I brought those slides. There's the link right there. It's about a 35-minute presentation followed by some Q&A, and the full set of slides is on that website. Read that science article. It will turn your head. Link is there as well. And most importantly, talk to your colleagues, especially mentor your earlier career colleagues. This is not okay to do this. Educate your leadership who may not be scientists themselves. We have to be on guard for this. Bring it up at your all hands meetings any way you can, okay? And I'll leave you with this great quotation from the amazing science and science fiction writer Isaac Asimov. He said these words in 1980. There is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. Does this sound familiar at all? So help us all out, folks. Let's get on board with this, and let's squash this problem flat today. Thanks very much for your time and attention.
Dave, thank you so much for highlighting this. This is a serious problem, and I can say on behalf of our community here, and certainly on behalf of Survey, that we want to help with this. It's going to be for everyone's good. I want to point out that it seems like certain parts of the community, such as young researchers, who might be particularly vulnerable to this, with such motivations to publish or perish in their careers. This is indeed a cancer on science that we need to eliminate soon. So we don't have a lot of time for questions, but I do have one here from Nick Schmer. Dave, can NASA or other funding agencies not allow spending of federal grant dollars on a listed or known predatory journals? Just like you can't use grant money for a range of dubious reasons. I imagine the issue would be enforcement, but it would be a start, ?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick. And one of the problematic things about lists that I obliquely referred to when I had that slide up is there are also legal issues that come up with lists. And there was a well-known one, a gentleman named Beal's list. You could Google that up. It was one of the first lists that someone tried to maintain, coming up on a decade ago now, maybe. And these folks took him to court. They ate him up with legal fees, and he eventually stood down and walked away from it because he couldn't afford it. So the government needs to be careful about what they do to not leave ourselves open to any kind of liability like that, which is why we really like this idea of using a definition instead of a list, because then no one's name is on some list. It's just everybody's judgment to apply these reasonable definitions and answer that question. I know we're out of time. There's a bunch of questions in chat. I'll get busy in there and start typing up some answers so that the program can continue on schedule.
Excellent. Thank you so much for calling our attention to this, Dave. Really appreciate it.